Welcome to the Muse table. I'm here today with Khadyajah Jenkins. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I can't complain. It's been a productive but like calm day. I'm trying to learn the difference between busy and productive. And
Oh,
so it's been a productive day.
okay, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. So, for our audience, can you introduce yourself and kind of walk us through the work that you're doing?
Yes, so I am Khadyajah Jenkins. I'm currently a doctoral student at Penn State, where my work sits at the intersection of Gen AI, the way that we learn, and the way that we love, to help create our lived experiences with a little bit more ease. I'm also an educator, research scientist, and so I help hundreds of students get into college and universities on full ride scholarships, partial scholarships, and then I also create community initiatives. So I have my book fairs where I host free book fairs in the city of Houston to help close the learning poverty gap.
I love that. You're doing so many amazing things. And I personally am such a fan of your content. And I think it's been helping me, honestly, like unlearn and kind of switch up the way that I view love and relationships. Because I think a lot of the way that our generation has been taught to love or view love and relationships can be very unhealthy. And a lot of us haven't grown up with healthy examples of love. So I think that all the work that you're doing is so amazing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So, on to my next question. What inspired you to start your social platforms on TikTok? And I know now you have a Substack, I believe.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I actually started on LinkedIn. I'm getting used to like people knowing me from TikTok because I'm typically used to people knowing me from LinkedIn. But what started my social media platforms is my work in advocacy, especially as it relates to education. And so my journey transitioning out of the classroom, I used to be a biology teacher, and then I went directly into the tech ecosystem where I was working at Adobe. And I knew that the students that I was working with at the time were going to like look me up on social media. And so because of that understanding, I wanted to have my social media platforms be a resource hub. And that has just grown beyond my wildest dreams. Specifically speaking about my TikTok, when I say students, like I think a lot of times people think students like, oh, like the little babies or, elementary school, middle school. But my students are college students. And so I knew when they were going into their first year of university, there were so many questions that they would have. And so I had my TikTok again through the same lens of I know my students are going to look me up. So let me make sure that this is a place of resources in the event that they need them. And it just has now expanded to nearly 60,000 people on TikTok, but combined is like 100,000 people. So I'm getting used to people knowing me as like a content creator versus like an educator or a research scientist academic.
I love that. And how exactly did you decide to get into the work of dissecting love and relationships on a more academic level?
Yes. So I love talking about love. So does everybody. But I had a deep fake created of me. And so that really fueled my work in advocacy because I was deeply aware from a victim's perspective on what frameworks do not exist. What are the things that don't exist as it relates to my protection? And I knew because I started my journey in education from a lens of advocacy and solely focusing like on the underbelly of education. And I knew if it happened to me as an educator, it was happening to children. And I started my work, and my work as it relates to love, public facing is like, this is how you love and this is how you build healthy relationships. But as a research scientist, I'm studying like the underbellies of society to create healthy and safe pathways out of sexual violence.
Mm, I love that. That is so beautiful. I think that is kind of a view of alchemy in my mind, where you take something that could be very destructive and harmful, and you could have definitely just been like, I don't want to deal with any of this. And instead, you're turning it into something beautiful. And I think that is so amazing. And I think that's definitely something that I think right now we're trying to navigate with this world of AI and the access and harm it can cause. So I think the work that you're doing is especially important in this time for
Thank
sure.
you so much. Thank you. I like the way that you framed like academia as alchemy. That has never crossed my mind before. So now I'm really going to sit with that and use that as my new like North Star in addition to what I do.
I love that. Who or what would you say is your muse?
Oh, I think myself. Like I really, especially as it relates to my work in academia, I am so inspired by my own thoughts and allowing those to like roam freely in the same way that we would in childhood as it relates to daydreaming, because my research process is so intimate to me. Like I'm not a person that I'm going to set up the camera and you're going to watch me study or like share the intimate processes of my studies, because it's like academic intimacy to me, where this is me and my thoughts and my intellectual thoughts. And so I think my biggest muse is my 16-year-old self and who I was. And if I were to sit down and have a conversation with my 16-year-old self, like would she be inspired by who I am today? And so really reminding myself through this lens of like selfishness as liberation, that you can inspire yourself. And kind of like, would my 16-year-old self think I'm cool? If the answer is no, then I need to go back to the drawing board and retouch back in with myself to make sure that my thoughts are organic, especially now in a world where we're constantly doom scrolling, where the algorithm is affecting so many different parts of our life, especially from a media literacy perspective. Really having the originality in my thoughts is something so important to me.
Yes, I love what you said about selfishness as liberation. That like struck me right in the heart, because I think that is so important, especially as Black women. And for me, I'm the eldest daughter in an immigrant household, so being selfish and learning how to be selfish has been really hard, but it's revolutionary, because I don't think a lot of times that we're given the space to be selfish, and it's painted as a negative rather than a positive. Because my view of it is, I feel like if you pour into yourself to the point that you're overflowing, you get to give that overflow to other people, instead of being so selfless where you're just pouring from like an empty cup that's dried up with dust in it and trying to give to others. And then it's like you hold all this resentment and anger and frustration, and then it creates more problems. So I love the idea of selfishness as liberation, because I don't think a lot of people see it that way.
Yeah, and I also think I have a unique perspective because I started my career in education, where it's like I started teaching at the age of 21. I was teaching biology, but also some of my students were 18. So I started working in industry and sector that is so selfless, where you have to give so much of yourself. And so I knew internally, like, you can't guilt trip me to being selfish and preserving what I need to take care of myself, because I'm giving so much to just the world of academia, being an educator so young, being an educator where I had no resources, only working in underfunded schools. So like always having to be innovative, not in the lens of inspiration, but out of the lens of desperation. And so the parts of myself that I can preserve and keep to myself, I really, really protect, but protection through the lens of grace.
That leads me to one of my other questions, which was about your personal and vulnerable content. Like, how do you preserve that privacy, and how do you decide what is just kept to yourself versus what you're sharing with the public?
Yeah, that's a really great question. My content is always rooted in academia. So because of the research that I do and what my research is rooted in is some of the most vulnerable topics, I'm never pulling from my like current day right now, unless I state that. I have no problem talking about the emotion that I feel. I will never talk about like the situation. Like you can never piece two and two together. But if I'm in a moment of grief, I'm going to articulate like what my grief is feeling like right now. This is how I'm navigating it. And I think it's really interesting because the little bits that I give, I see how people want to form a parasocial relationship with me. And because I'm very stern on my positioning on social media that is like academic, this professor, this educator, this research scientist, I never want to like aid in creating those parasocial relationships, which is why like I only heavily focus on the academia or making our lived experiences academic in a way of honoring and preservation, but never violating my personal life, because I'm not the only like character in my life. There's so many people at the intersection. So I have to also not honest, but also be very mindful and protect their privacy as well as it relates to that, especially as my platforms are growing. Because at 2,000 followers, it was like, oh my gosh, guys, look at what I'm doing. Look at all this. At 60,000 followers, it's a lot different on how you have to be mindful.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well with my writing. Obviously, I'm not doing academic writing. Mine is a little bit more like personal and emotional, and trying to navigate what to share and how much to share, because people are coming for emotional, vulnerable essays about my life. But it's also like, how do you straddle that line of like what's too much to share? So that's definitely something that I'm thinking about as well, because you're right. Like, you are involving other people as well. Like, I'm not the only person that's being impacted by what I'm sharing. And I think I've been realizing that as I'm growing my platform as well, where I am having people from my life even reach out and be like, hey, is this about me? Like, who is that about? Like, where is this coming from? So it's definitely something to keep in mind. I'm definitely going to take some of what you said in mind as I move forward with my platform. Speaking on bridging education, advocacy, and your personal storytelling, your grief, your emotions that are tied into your academic work, how do you go about integrating all of them in one?
Because I started on LinkedIn, that's how I started on LinkedIn. It was just natural to me. Because I have been using LinkedIn as my professional and academic like diary. So when I got laid off, I told hundreds and thousands of people like, hey, I just lost my job. Like, and when I was like job searching, or when I got into my doctoral program. So like, people have seen me from biology teacher and everybody that I've worked with at that time, then working at tech, and just really seeing my story translate in real time, again, without violating like that personal privacy, but also normalizing, like, we don't just have to talk about the celebratory moments, because then it starts to feel inauthentic. And as someone who sits at many intersections of education, I know the power in like honesty, and not honesty in the lens of like truth telling, but honesty in the way of storytelling. Like, yeah, y'all, I lost my job. Like, I don't know what to say at this moment. I lost my job. Or, y'all, like, I'm doing these community book fairs and this is what it's rooted in. And I think that vulnerability is something that cannot be manufactured, right? And I think a lot of us are looking for authentic community and acknowledging that social media has been and became this digital third space where I don't want to be the content creator now that people are like, oh, that's inauthentic, or why are you only sharing the highlights? Because I'm also and have been an educator, and I know the struggles of what it feels like to be a student. I know what it feels like to be the broke college student. I know what it feels like to fail the test. I know what it feels like to like put your all in something and get rejected. But also on the flip side of that, I have my master's in teaching. I've been a teacher. I know the scaffolding that can help you get from the place of failure to passing. And having that like juxtaposition of both teacher and student constantly allows me to also navigate not only my personal vulnerability, but understanding how to hold space and accountability at the same time. And that has just translated to every different intersection of my life, especially now that my work is in the intersection of love, which is the most vulnerable experiences that we have as human beings. And the next thing to that is grief. And so we have to hold space. We have to hold grace. We have to hold accountability. We have to hold vulnerability without demonizing it.
Yes, I love all of that. That is so important to know. I think it can be really difficult to be vulnerable, especially on social media. It can be really uncomfortable to, I don't know, wear your flaws publicly. So you being able to do that from the beginning and having that honesty in your work is so important. I think, especially in this age of influencer culture and kind of feeling like TikTok is a huge just walking ad essentially, and people kind of just using scripts and like immediately jumping out at you being like, you need this, you need to buy this, like, hey, watch this. I think having people that are authentic and are able to be honest and real about like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything is peaches and cream and that everything's fine. Like I'm actually going through something and this is what that looks like. And I can relate to some of your experiences because I've gone through that in real life. And I think that's so important. I think that's something that I'm feeling like I'm lacking in social media, which is why I feel the need to kind of move away from short form content, because I feel like there is a lack of inauthenticity and it feels so just like forced and manufactured, and it's starting to kind of, I feel like generally I feel like it's a society, and maybe it's just like me and my little echo chamber. I feel like we're starting to grade against that, where we're just like, none of this feels real and none of this feels authentic or honest. And I think it's so important now moving forward, now that we've had like the 5 years since COVID of like all of this super hyper capitalism, inauthentic manufactured content, to like shift more towards just talking about real things like love and grief in a real way, not just like my situationship that like liked my story, but like actually like the practice of love. And I think that is so important.
Yeah, and I think I haven't had the experience where people didn't champion me on. So I don't have the frame of reference where people are like, Khadyajah, that's too much. I've had the opposite where people are like, keep going. Like, we need this. And I'll reference back to LinkedIn because my tone of voice on LinkedIn is not the typical, like, hey, I'm thrilled to announce, or like this very corporate jargon.
Yeah.
I type in lowercase on all social media platforms, including LinkedIn. And I know that's like, that's okay on Twitter, that's okay on Threads, but when you see it on LinkedIn, it's kind of like, ooh. But again, the juxtaposition of I'm getting my doctorate degree. And if you understand the significance to that, or it's kind of like an Easter egg because I am a scholar of bell hooks. And so it's a way to honor bell hooks, which is why I only type in lowercase. But to have my advocates be like the executive directors of Fortune 500 companies, or the biggest CEOs of some of the nonprofit organizations, or professors at these top universities, where that was my starting point. And so it's like, I don't have that frame of reference of like, I got to break through like this chamber of noise, and then this is my tone of voice, or this is the rebrand. No, I started like this. And I also only type in lowercase on my text messages too. And so that is my tone of voice. It doesn't matter where you meet me at. And so just modes of, this is my standard. I know this is probably what they're doing, but when you come to Khadyajah's world, this is what it is. And I think having, again, that selfishness and how you show up also speaks to the power of why it's so important to be authentic. Because I was thinking about this today. Everybody wants to be the trailblazer until it's your time to be the first, until it's your time to be the different person, because it's daunting and maybe cringe. People may not like understand it, but isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point to be authentic? Isn't that the whole point to be vulnerable, which is like this lack of caring of what other people think? But I've always been like this my entire life. And so, of course, when I was younger, it wasn't fostered in the same way that it was now, but it was never like demonized in a way of like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. It's kind of like, well, if you don't like it, you don't like it. And we all have things that we like and we don't like. And it just is what it is. That's the point of life. And so that's kind of how my mindset has always been since I was like born.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think about like when TikTok really blew up, I think a lot of people were trying to model what worked for other influencers. And I feel like we started to kind of create this echo chamber of everyone sounding the same, acting the same, with the same aesthetic. And now I think we are getting overwhelmed with that. And I think we're itching for authenticity. And I think that's something that I have even been guilty of as well, trying to just replicate what I'm seeing, because I'm like, okay, well, this is what works and this is what people want to see, because you think that's what people want to see because that's what capitalism is selling us. But realistically, what we want is people that are showing up authentically as themselves, whether it's typing in lowercase or showing up on TikTok and crying because they lost their job or whatever it is. I think as much as I love TikTok and I spend way too much time on it, I definitely do think that it has caused a lot of damage as well. And I think now we're trying to learn how to reverse that and learning how to be truly who we are. And that's something that I've been talking a lot about my friends as well, just talking about what do we actually like versus what is social media telling us that we like. Who do we actually want to be, or who are we actually, without TikTok telling us how to dress or what music to listen to or who to follow on Instagram. Like, what do we authentically like and how do we authentically want to show up? And I think it can be difficult when you're getting just so flooded by just narratives of like how to show up, especially as a Black woman or as whatever it is under whatever identity. It can be a lot. So I think that's something I'm constantly keeping in mind now as I'm like moving through the second half of my 20s. Like, okay, the first half of my 20s, maybe I was just kind of like following the trends because that's natural when you are figuring yourself out. Like, you're going to go off of what works. And now it's like, okay, I've done that. That obviously wasn't making me feel good and made me very unhappy. Now I have to focus on what's going to make me feel good and what's authentic to me, instead of trying to conform to what I think is going to get me success and happiness, which ultimately is not going to last.
Yeah. I like how you said that. And I think also giving ourselves space and grace as we're in our 20s. This is our first time out of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we tend to lose sight of that because it's like, I have to have it figured out now. And that's what all of these algorithms are telling you to do, that you have to do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
I have the sobering reality, because I also sometimes fall into the trap of like, am I doing enough? Like, do I need another degree? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? Do I need to do all of these things? But the sobering reality of my research that I do, because it also sits at the intersection of like the workforce. I'm like, do you know how rare you are? Like, and I think a lot of times we need to be reminded of our uniqueness and the skill sets that we have. And sometimes like really looking up the statistics. And when I think about it, especially through the lens of my work in education, understanding my positioning within academia is rare. And like not taking that for granted. And I'm not doing this to go viral. I'm not doing this to be the next sensation, but I'm honoring those who came before me and also breaking down the barriers for the students that I have currently sitting in these universities, understanding that the Department of Education and the education enterprise is being dismantled. I can never lose sight about that, because I know the names of their mothers. I know the names of the students that are going to go into university in 3 weeks to sit and be the first. So understanding that my story is not solely about me. My story is at the intersection of so many other people's stories. Whether you've come across me on TikTok, whether you come across me on LinkedIn, whether you've met me on the street, whether I served you books at my community book fairs, whether you are a student of mine, and understanding I have a responsibility. And I remember when I was going through like the emotional toll of having the deep fake created of me, one of the things that I said, and I kept repeating to one of my coworkers, I didn't sign up to be a role model. I didn't sign up for this. Now being able to see past my hurt, being able to see past my betrayal, is even though I did not sign up for this, even though I did not think about being an educator in any way, shape, or form, being a research scientist, now being a content creator, I did not sign on a physical paper, but I understand the lens in which people are viewing me through. And whether I like it or not, that is a responsibility that I have to honor. And once I was able to like just come to terms with that, I started to view it completely different, the work that I do, because it's not about me. I really think about, like, especially getting my doctorate degree right now is one of those things, like, when you learn a lot, you realize that you don't know anything. But my work is also so time sensitive. It's so time sensitive, and it's not about me. This degree that I'm getting in particular is for the students that advocated for me when I could not advocate for myself. And this is the greatest thank you that I could give them, to make sure I'm breaking down those barriers, to making sure that I'm speaking about the resources that I know about and sharing that. And if it touches other people, that is phenomenal. But
Right.
in particular, this journey in particular is to those who knew me as Miss Jenkins and advocated for me in that classroom when I literally was so numb to my pain. And so regrounding myself in this like interconnectivity is also what puts one foot in front of the others when the road gets hard.
I love the view of your work and getting your doctorate and everything that you're doing, being a thank you to those that have uplifted you and supported you. I think that is so beautiful, because a lot of times I think we can kind of forget how we got to where we are, and sometimes like not having a greater purpose or reason behind what we're doing. Sometimes I think we can be on autopilot. Like even for me, like I got my master's, and I think a little bit of that was because I was just like, okay, well, I'm done with undergrad. Like, what am I going to do now? Like the next natural step is to get my master's, instead of having like a natural, like a genuine purpose and service for what I'm doing my work for. And that's kind of why I'm creating the Muse table, because I want this to serve a larger purpose. Like I want people to see the different facets of creativity and what that can look like, and to hear from creatives about their creative process, because I think sometimes creatives, we can be in a little bit of a bubble, and we can be a little isolated and so like head down in our work, and we don't really communicate with each other as much as we should. So I think for me, I would have loved to have a platform like the one that I'm creating now, to hear about like how do people go about creating, whether it's like on Substack and you're writing creative fiction, or you're creating academia, or whatever it is. Like hearing about that process and what drives you to create is so important, and having a bigger reason behind all the things that you're doing, instead of just acting on impulse almost.
I love that. And I remember I was hosting a lecture at Virginia Tech. And when I host lectures, I intentionally do it on my work in love, because we can hear about education and do all of that. But I think it's also what my positioning as a love scholar as well is, like, academia also has to be a loving space. And that cannot be an afterthought. That cannot be locker room talk. That has to be at the groundwork of what we're doing, because so many different types of love stories are being created within academia, whether it's academically, whether it's romantically, whether it's professionally, whether it's platonically. And there's not a lot of spaces that allow academia to be loving, from the toppest, or not toppest, but from the highest part, where it's like the provost and the presidents, all the way down to the student body. And so like these conversations rooted in love, and who holds the grief in academia, who holds the joy in academia, who holds the love in academia. And when times get hard, how do we come together through this lens of like communal love to navigate? And so really normalizing like the conversations around love, and understanding that most people's like first touch point to love is going to be like romantic. And so not negating that fact, let's bring that into conversation, but also through the lens of exploration of other different pathways to love.
What would you say is the most important thing that you've learned in your research in love?
Oh, the most important thing is dismantling the harmful beliefs of oppression to your love life, and how you are either consciously or subconsciously carrying that out in those that you are loving with. Because I think a lot of times it's when we tell our own love stories, we tell what people have done to us. And not what we have done to others. And so it's like this unique and beautiful kind of like Rubik's Cube, right? Of having those delicate conversations, having the conversations of accountability, having the conversations of excitement, having the conversations of lust, having the conversations of sexuality, having the conversations of boundaries, and like really bringing this all together. And understanding love through a lens of belonging, whatever chapter of the love life that you're in, whether it's the self-love, whether it's romantic, whether it's platonic, whether it's love through community, love through humanity, love through family. But understanding we cannot build the house and pillars of love through the lens of oppression. Especially when we are speaking about love that's liberating, love that's spiritual, love that allows you to touch the clouds and stay there. We have to understand what are also the harmful stereotypes that we were taught. And I think also I have the unique perspective of studying the love pedagogy through a historical perspective, starting at the antebellum period, because I focus on the context, geographical context of the United States. And so what are some of the things that we are upholding that our ancestors were taught in slavery outside of survival? And now that has translated to how we're loving romantically. And like, those are the nuances and intersecting dialogues that also have to be considered. But I know that, and I learned this actually yesterday, that what is digestible to me may not be digestible to the masses, and understanding how to put information that is digestible, because tying in my work in education equity, especially as it relates to literacy, illiteracy also affects our love life. And so I am learning the like delicate balance of, again, what is digestible and makes sense to me. And because I can digest these very intricate and traumatic stories without internalizing it as my own, I know that the majority cannot. And so thinking about how I teach love through that lens, but still honoring those stories that allowed us to breathe freely, literally.
Yeah. What you were saying about kind of relearning or honestly unlearning what we believe about love is so, so important. I actually wrote a Substack essay talking about that, like, what is true romantic love? And I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, why is it that I am attracted to certain types? Why do I like certain versions of love? And I literally just had a conversation with one of my friends about even like the Summer I Turned Pretty is coming out on Wednesday, and the little love triangle. And it's like you have this like moody, like emotionally withdrawn, avoidant type. And then you have like this like more like outwardly expressing lover boy type. And I feel like we romanticize both of them. And it's like realistically, both of them are not healthy partners for the main character. And I think we just focus so much on like this idea of like what we've been sold in romance movies and in books and TV shows, that is like the pinnacle of love. And we've internalized all of that. We've never really sat down to evaluate like what actually is true romantic love for ourselves, not even just like on a societal level, like what is going to serve me, because what's going to serve me is different from what's going to serve you or the next person. And I think that we, at least for me, I'm starting to really think a lot about that and what love really looks like in a more like healthy, balanced, grounded view, instead of just kind of accepting toxic love and situationships and hookup culture and all of those things, because I think that's very normalized and it's just in our society. And yeah, I'm really taking in everything you're saying and really thinking about like my own experiences as well. And I'm like, wow, like I do kind of romanticize love a little bit. And I think also viewing love in a more realistic, grounded way as well, and not this pinnacle of something that's going to save you, rather than something that is an experience between two people with aligned views and aligned values, is another thing that, again, that I feel like a lot of us, or maybe not, I don't want to project onto everyone, but something that I wasn't taught, because especially if you grew up in a household where maybe that wasn't the priority, or you grew up around like maybe a toxic marriage or whatever the case may be, like that's what you think is the baseline. That's where your nervous system is comfortable with. So when you are presented with alternatives to that, that can be a lot, and it can be scary and uncomfortable, or sometimes even boring. You might feel like that's not what's right for me. So it's just a lot of the things that we're talking about right now are things that I've been talking about over the past like week, honestly, with like everyone in my life. So I'm like processing as we're speaking about these things.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for people to understand who they are as a romantic being. And I think it's so easy for us to like default to how I want to be romanced, and that is valid. And I'm not taking that away from any single person. In the same way that you know who you are as a student, as an employee, as a sister, as a brother, as a friend, who are you as a lover? How do you show up in romance? And I think there's this unique dance of like, well, I'll let the guy lead first. Like, I'll let them call first. I'll let him get me the first gift, especially in like these heteronormative relationship dynamics. One thing, because I know I have an avoidant attachment style, and so I'm typically always on the first date going to bring a small gift because it has, not to say nothing to do with the person that I'm going on the date with, because obviously it does, but it's helping me unlearn some of the stereotypes that I have internalized, especially as it relates to transactional relationship dynamics, which I think a lot of the advice on social media is solely rooted in transactional relationship dynamics. And I remember I was talking to my therapist about a situationship that I had, and she said, Khadyajah, if you stay in this, this is going to be the emotional depth that you will ever reach. That broke my brain open, especially because the work that I do in love is like a mirror to my face every single day. Where the research that I do in education, again, I can separate who I am as a researcher from the work that I'm researching. Like I get into this mold. But when you are researching something as sensitive as love, it is meant to be reflective.
Yeah.
It's meant for you to dig deeper. I'm constantly asking myself, who am I as a lover without the influences of anything or anyone else? So thinking about my love journey, again, like through the lens of exploration, through the lens of who I am as a romantic being without fear attached. And so it's like, you're going to have to call first. You haven't called nobody. Go ahead, pick up the phone if you want to talk to someone. If you miss someone, say that you miss them. Like, if you love someone, say that you love them. Like, because the people and the person that is aligned with who you are is not going to be scared from that. And I think it goes back to like also the sense of rejection that I was holding so close to and that I was over identifying with. But again, going back to like our very first conversation of like, I've always had this, like, if you don't like me, you don't like me. And there's nothing that I can do about that to like convince you to like me. And I also realize that's how I am as a lover. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I'm going to allow this experience to be as authentic as possible. I'm not going to try to be the puppeteer of, okay, if I say this, then I'm hoping it will lead him to say X, Y, and Z. No, if I stutter over my words, I stutter over my words. If I don't, I don't. If I say something, correct me. Like one of those things, allowing love to genuinely be an authentic human experience. And I think especially with social media, because it's like you have to wait on this date to do this. You have to make sure that they spend X amount of dollars to do this. And I also don't think a lot of people understand where that transactional relationship advice is actually rooted in. And so there's this level of safety that you genuinely have to understand the importance of history and historical context to things. And I think that nuance, because people are wanting to go viral, really creates this gray area of, well, social media told you to go sit at a restaurant bar and wait for someone to come up to you. But if you understand the history of freestyling as it relates to sex work, it's like these things become very overlapping when it comes to the viral or not viral, the viral advice that is given.
Yeah.
And I think people also have to understand the role of media. There's two roles of media, either to educate or make money. And most people are not educating. So it is to make money. And so to have their advice be monetized in some way, shape, or form also has to be mindful of how authentic is this person. And like that is going to require a level of trust, a level of discernment, and just like a level of self-reflective on where you are at and how you digest information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's making me think about the femininity dating coaches on all over social media. And I know a few of them have said, like, I'm not teaching you how to love, I'm teaching you how to make money, which I think is completely a fair assessment. But I think a lot of us are lying to ourselves about what we truly desire. Like, a lot of us are romantics. We want true romantic love, but we are following these tips from people who are not teaching us how to show up in love and be authentic and be real. They're teaching us mind games and how to manipulate people to get what we want. And that's not going to lead you to where you want to be. You want someone to meet you and see you for who you are and love you as you are, and you do the same for them. And I think you can get really caught up in all these mind games. And I was talking to my roommate about this as well, where I'm honestly just kind of over the whole idea of like whispering with my friends and be like, oh my God, is he looking over here? Or, oh, like I'm gonna take 3 hours to respond. Like it's starting to feel like a little elementary, where it's like at the end of the day, like we are adults and we're in our 20s and we want to not replicate what we've seen with our parents' generation, older generations. We want to show up authentically and with love. And if we want that, doing these mind games and trying to manipulate things and manipulate situations and trying to show up in this perfectly curated, like ideal girl, dream girl mindset is not going to lead us to where we want to be. And it's going to create fake and authentic relationships that are eventually going to crumble. And we're going to continue that pattern, that cycle that we've been seeing. And that's something that I'm really trying to embody, where I'm like, I don't want him to like me because I am trying to curate this image of the perfect girl because I think that's what he wants. I want him to like me because he sees me as Janice and he says, I like how crazy, quirky, talkative she is, not because I pretended to be something that I'm not, because eventually the mask is going to fall. And when he sees, oh, wait, she's been lying to me, or vice versa, if he's pretending to be this perfect guy and doing all these things and you realize actually he can't keep up with any of those things and that's not authentic to who he is, then it's going to cause all these problems. And I think that's something that probably happened in a lot of the older generations, where they probably were conforming to these ideas of like what a woman should be, what a man should be, what a husband should be, what a wife should be. And you can only keep up with that for so long until the mask falls, the curtains pull apart, and you have to see a person as they actually are. And you realize you're not who I want you to be. So it's easier to just show up authentically, as real and raw and uncomfortable as that is. That's probably the best way to go about love and dating from what I've learned and what I've read so far. But again, it's like a constant growing, evolving process of like first uncovering who you are so you know how you should be showing up to partners, but also like what it is that you're looking for, and not just like you were saying, this idea of like what we've been taught to like, instead of just kind of thinking like, okay, I want a man that buys me flowers because that's what I think a woman of value is. You have to really evaluate, do I even like flowers, or is that something that's just going to sit on my counter that's going to die that I barely look at? Like maybe you'd rather get books instead, or maybe you'd rather get, I don't know, like wine bottles or whatever it is. Like all those things are things that are constantly permeating my mind. But I do kind of want to go back to the creative process and your research process. And I want to understand what that looks like for you. Like not only in the actual practice of doing that, but also emotionally, spiritually, like what goes into that for you?
It's really simple. I'm one of those people, like I try not to complicate things, because once it gets overcomplicated, it's losing the plot for me. So I'll just have a topic that I want to study. So for example, let's say I'm studying Black history. I'll find an article and then I'll play a book, and I handwrite all of my notes. So I don't print anything off. or if it is printed, I'll highlight and then I write down the parts that I'm highlighting, because that allows my ideation process and phase to like really kick in. And then the thoughts that are then birthed from that ideation process, I just write it down.
Mhm.
Yes, it's that simple for me. I try to just be very intentional with the work that I'm reading. Yeah, I don't know if I would view my academic journey as creative, because it's so deeply intertwined with my work, like my real life job. Um, and so I think as it relates to the creative process for me, I don't do it as much now because I'm so busy, but I used to paint a lot. I'm like a hobbyist, so everything in my apartment I created, from the rugs to the paintings.
Wow.
I know how to crochet. I know how to make rugs. I know how to knit. I know how to sew. That's just a part of myself that I don't showcase. It's very, very rare for me to talk about, because that's something, if you know me personally, then that's something that you get to experience.
Mhm.
And I think it kind of goes back to our very first conversation on how do you know what to share and how do you know what to protect. And so I think my creative side and who I am as a creative is what I keep for me and my loved ones, but not for the consumption of an audience.
Oh, I love that, honestly. I think as creatives, it can be easy to feel like you need to feed the capitalist loop and you need to monetize every single thing that you're doing. And I think it's so important to learn, like, you're allowed to just create because you want to create, not because you want to make six figures off of it and have it fund your entire life. Like, I think it's okay to have a day job and have that be your baseline. And that's something that I'm learning as well, because at the end of the day, we have to pay our bills, like rent has to get paid. And sometimes not everything needs to be consumption. Sometimes you want to keep things for yourselves. And I have had some other conversations with creatives where it's like, even if you are someone that is pursuing a creative career, there are things even within your creativity that you keep to yourself. Like, there are some essays that I write that I'm like, I can never let another soul see this ever. And I think that's so important to have like a sacred space for just you, or just for the people that know you and love you, because I think it's so easy to constantly just be like giving and giving. Like I was saying, like giving from a dry, empty cup instead of like giving your overflow, where like you've made sure that you're good and you're solid, and giving whatever you feel like is excess, rather than just like pouring from something that is drained.
Yeah. And I think for me, as it relates to my intellect, I also find joy and like power in being able to now like capitalize off my intellect, because it's also a part of service. Like, if you know my work, you kind of know where I stand as it relates to community and how I serve the community. But also, again, going back, like, you can't guilt trip me to everything needs to be free. I have spent years in the classroom. Okay. I've done my due diligence. And even technically that was not free, because there was a paycheck, even though it was small attached to it. It was a paycheck. And I don't know. I think I've had such an interesting perspective on being at different intersections of the workforce and having mentors that are CEOs that don't fall into the belief of like not getting paid your worth. And so having to address my fear of money, especially as my content creation journey grows, I understand me holding on to the fear of money will literally not make me any money.
Mm-hmm.
And like, me understanding that the creator economy is projected to make $55 billion, and the inequities and the wealth inequities that currently exist within this space, as someone who speaks transparently on the importance of closing the wealth gap, closing that education gap, I also have to abide to what I'm teaching. Like, I cannot fall into my fears or let my fears really overcome me in this way of like, you're not deserving. No, you are. If not you, then who? Like, quite literally, genuinely, if not you, then who? And I'm also getting a master's, my MBA in the luxury ecosystem. So I've studied the private jetting industry. I've studied the mega yachts. I've seen it, not only just studied it, I've seen it. So it's like the way that money is talked about in different industries in different socioeconomic classes, it's vastly different. And having that transparent conversation on what money actually is and how it is used on different pyramids of the socioeconomic class is something that's important for us to genuinely understand, especially as technology is growing, that digital divide, but also that wealth divide. And so if you don't know, and the workforce is being changed every single day due to automation, you need to know how to make money. You need to know how to use money. You need to know these industries. And I think that's also at the work or at the intersection of the work that I do with technology in the workforce, because these conversations have to be had beyond like, oh, try this new AI tool. Like, how many AI tools can we possibly have? We need to have the conversations that organizations have centralized AI. And so if you're not upskilling in the right direction, everybody cannot be a project or a program manager, right? There's only a number of those. You have to understand the industries, what skill sets that they need, what educational pathways to get there, because so many different things are being automated, and don't want to be put into a position where you get laid off and now it's so hard for you to go back into the workforce because what you studied 2 years ago is now deemed as outdated. These are the conversations that we genuinely need to be having, not a 50-50 conversation. Like, the workforce is directly aligned to our love lives. And so we cannot exclude the relationship between economics and love, especially in a world where hundreds of thousands of people are getting laid off every single month.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in denial about the fact that they need to be constantly updating their skills, because right now things are moving very, very, very quickly. And unfortunately, if you're not up to date, you are going to be left behind.
Exactly.
And I love that you're getting another master's. Like I know everyone talks about the stereotype about Black women always getting a master's degree, but I do think that genuinely, like what you're getting your master's in is important, and constantly making sure that like you have marketable skills, because what was acceptable maybe 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, is not acceptable now. Like, we have to constantly be keeping our eye on the market and what's happening and what is going to make us money. Because at the end of the day, like, we live in a capitalist society. Like I said, bills need to get paid, and it does impact your dating and relationship experiences on either side, whether you're a man or woman. Like, that's going to impact you, because if you're, as a woman, if you are of a higher economic status, then obviously you want to ideally date your equal or above. And with men, if you have a lower economic status, that kind of lowers your experiences of what type of woman you have access to. So it's a lot of things that all of us have to keep in mind as we are progressing with technology progressing. Things are changing very rapidly every single day. I'm like shocked every time I listen to my news podcast in the morning about all the things that I'm hearing. But I think it's a very important conversation to have, especially within our generation, especially in our 20s, because this is the critical time where the seeds that we plant now are going to be the fruits that we harvest in the future. So it's really important where we put our time and our money into. And that kind of leads me to my next question, kind of. What do you see for the future of your work, and what is the next chapter looking like for you?
This is a question that I have been pondering for like the past 6 months, because I think now being viewed as a content creator, I don't know if I've fully accepted that term. Like, I love being an academic, I love being a researcher, but being able to have a platform with visibility and its scalability has changed my goal. Also, with the dismantling of the Department of Education, it's something that affects me personally in the work that I do, not only as an educator, but also as a student, as a researcher, because I'm still in school. But I see myself creating my own research firm. Starting next month in August, I'll have my Patreon coming out. And so that will be like the first step before I really solidify my research firms as two separate entities. Again, being around education and then one being around love. I think where I see myself growing is in ownership, because there's also this cost of scalability and visibility that people don't talk about, which is your followers aren't the only one viewing you through this lens of social media. It's also potential bosses and potential jobs and organizations where Khadyajah is now a brand that is recognizable, especially my hair and my nails. Like, people know me based off of my looks. And there is this cost of perception that people aren't honest about, or maybe they're too scared to talk about, because depending on where you work, you will get bigger than the program. Or you will be seen as a threat that will be bigger than the program. So there's going to eventually be a crossroad. And I see this particularly only happening to Black creators, where you have to choose. You have to choose in completely throwing away or stopping your content creator journey, which we understand what that can scale to. And you have to pick, do you want to go the corporate route, and do you just want to climb the corporate ladder? But what is interesting, because the veil has been pulled back, because so many people have been transparent about, like, this is how much money they're making, or this is the opportunities they're receiving, you're now having to have an honest conversation on the value of being a worker and the value of being the owner. There's a reason why people break out of the corporate like cycle. There's a reason why people don't do entrepreneurship. Like, and I think it's one of these decisions for me that are becoming louder and louder and louder, that I have to really understand and weigh out the pros and cons, because there is no wrong answer. That's another thing. But with the workforce changing, and with me having, like, again, the unique intimacy with my research, especially studying AI, and also to be able to sit in certain rooms, which most people will never have access to, and to hear their advice, like the creating of my own something, whatever that something is. But my fear that I have, or I don't even know if it's a fear. I think it started out as a fear, now as a realization. You're going to have to trust yourself in a light that you never did. You're going to have to trust your voice in a way that you never did. And so learning what my voice sounds like through that lens is interesting, and still, like, having to manage my plate of working my 9 to 5, being a full-time student as well, creating content 3 to 9 times a day on one platform. I'm really posting probably 15 at minimum times a day across multiple platforms every single day. And so just thinking about, like, what does balance look like as it relates to following your dreams, and also trusting time. And because if you rush and do things too fast, you're going to have to, like, backtrack a couple steps. And so that's also going to not only cost time, but also cost money. And so I think I know what my next step is going to be, which is, like, again, creating my research firms. But it's now, to me, about trusting the timing, and trusting the timing of when to leave things.
I love that. I love that, the concept of ownership. I think that is so important. Like you were saying, I have also noticed with a lot of Black creators, them becoming bigger than the program in their corporate jobs, not really liking that they have these platforms. And I think moving forward as creators, having to really consider, like, which side do I go on? Because the corporate ladder is something that has been set for a really long time, and is, I don't want to say it's easy to follow, but it's easier to follow because there is a kind of clear trajectory, or creating your own thing, which takes a lot of bravery and trust and security in yourself. And I love that concept of seeing more Black people in those spaces, because I think we're setting or you're setting a good example for people that are coming up to see, okay, I don't only have to follow this path in order to have success. So I love that. This leads me to my last final question. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Mm. If I could tell my younger self one thing, I don't know. I really follow the wisdom of my younger self still. So I think it would be like, you were right. Like you were right. You were right the entire time. Like, yeah, you were right. And I think that's something, that consistent thread of like, yeah, sometimes you do know more than people. Like, and I think a lot of times we are fed the advice of like, you're just so young. But I'm someone that's like so logical and like pragmatic in my thinking process and so research backed. And when the people that told me I couldn't do it, very few, but it was the people that I was romantically dating. I remember one person in particular, when I was a teacher, I was saying that I really, really wanted to work in tech. And he was like, okay, good luck. And that was the one person I remember. But my other partners, like, they were really supportive. It didn't matter what I did. They were like, okay, like, how can I help? But yeah, you were right. You were right the whole time.
That is so beautiful. I find myself thinking that a lot about my younger self. Like everything I thought back then, even when I was 5, was exactly what I needed to think, and everything else was for the birds.
Yeah, literally.
Thank you so much, Khadyajah. This was such an amazing conversation. I gained so much insight on your work, on academia, on being a creator in this time. So thank you so much. And I will make sure to leave all of your socials and all the work that you're doing in the description across all platforms. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm going to stop recording.